We'll be getting started in just a few minutes. I apologize for the background noise. We've got 4 helicopters flying overhead with the living flag going on here on site while we're doing our live broadcast. So right now, I want to go ahead and do a roll call. And what I'm going to ask each school to do is I'm going to have the teacher select a student to represent your school to step forward up to the camera and close to the microphone, please, and introduce your school, say what your name is, who your teacher is, and what class you're in. So I want to start with Elizabeth Forward Middle School. Would someone from Elizabeth Forward like to introduce your class to the rest of the group, please?
Sixth and 8th grade of Elizabeth Forward Middle School in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. And my name is Mr. Weimerskirch.
And the name of the teacher was?
Actually, Mr. Englert, Jordan Englert, is putting this together. He'll be here.
Thank you, Elizabeth Forward Middle School. Can we have a representative from Chase County Elementary School, please?
Go in front of the camera, yeah.
Aiden Eidman, Chase County, and 4th grade. This is the girl.
We lost your audio, Linda.
Thank you, Chase County. North Idaho STEM Academy, can we have someone introduce your school, please? Do we have somebody from Idaho STEM Academy?
I think they're unmuting.
We're here. Hello.
Hi. Would someone like to introduce their class and their teacher, please?
The teachers are Mr. Johnson, Mr. Clifton, and Mrs. Brubaker. And this is the classes of 5th grade and 6th grade from North Idaho STEM Charter Academy. Say hello, folks.
Hi. Thanks for joining us, North Idaho STEM.
Thank you.
Idaho Distance Education. Would someone like to introduce your class, please? Your name.
My name is Luke Schauble. We are the Idaho Distance Education Academy, and we are 4th through 8th graders. And the teacher is Diane Neal.
Thank you, Idaho Distance Academy. Do we have anyone from Elsa England Elementary School in Round Rock, Texas?
We're 5th graders from Elsa England, and our teacher is Miss Armachild.
And what grade are you? 5th grade. Okay, thank you. And Eula Elementary in Clyde, Texas. Anyone from Eula Elementary?
This is Eula Elementary, and this is 5th and 6th grade, and our teachers are Miss O'Shields, Miss Kelly, and Miss DeZern.
Thank you. Welcome, Eula. Well, my name is Linda Rosenblum, and I'm an education specialist with the National Park Service out of Washington, D.C., and I want to thank you all for joining us and welcome you to the Star-Spangled Banner 200th anniversary event and Defenders Day at Fort McHenry. Before we get started, I want to take a minute just to recognize all the partners that made this program available today, starting with Idaho Public TV, that's providing our live stream for those of all the public and the schools that are watching us live on the web. Thank you, Idaho Public TV. We have the Idaho Education Network, which is hosting our bridge for all 6 of our schools to participate today. Polycom and Special Polycom Federal that are providing our services for our equipment today. Internet 2, And the captain and crew of the Pride of Baltimore, thank you for joining us. And we also want to thank Novotel. Right now I want to take a minute before we get started with our live program to show you a video clip from one of our partner schools in the United Kingdom that is also hosting a Living Flag event, and they videotaped theirs for us so that you can see it and participate in the program as well. So at this time we're going to show you the video from the United Kingdom. Now we want to get started into the main portion of our program, and I want to apologize for all the background noise. We've got helicopters overhead today, but we're going to try and go ahead and make this a live event that we can all appreciate. So we want to start by letting you know where we're at today. Fort McHenry is located in Baltimore, Maryland, and we're about 35 miles north of Washington, D.C., near the Chesapeake Bay. There we go. This is the year of the writing of the Star-Spangled Banner. 200 years ago, on September 14th, Francis Scott Key saw the large American flag waving over Fort McHenry and was inspired to write the words that became our country's national anthem. The national anthem and the American flag are two of the greatest symbols we have as a people, and both of them are connected to Fort McHenry. Today, over 8,000 people are making history as we speak, and you are too, virtually, by participating in the Star-Spangled Banner Living American Flag. Just as Americans from all walks of life gathered together to defend Baltimore from the British in 1814, all of us are gathered together to remember the important events that gave us our country's song. This will be the largest living Star-Spangled Banner ever formed. However, it's not the first. Students gathered here at Fort McHenry are reenacting an event that happened 100 years ago during the centennial celebration of the national anthem. In 1914, over 6,000 students came to Fort McHenry either by walking, taking a steamboat, or a trolley car to form the first American living flag. Today we will explore how our national anthem was born and why seeing the flag is so important to Francis Scott Key. To do that, we'll have to make a virtual visit to Fort McHenry. The original fort still stands, and we will view it from their perspectives of soldiers, civilians, and especially Francis Scott Key himself. We want to think about how events in the past shape our lives in the present, and how decisions we make today will affect the future. Now, can somebody from Elsa England Elementary tell me how the Star-Spangled Banner was written? Or can you tell me anything that you might know about the Star-Spangled Banner?
Well, the Star-Spangled Banner was is a song about our freedom, and when this song was made when the British were against America for America's freedom, and this song is
Francis Scott Key.
About freedom and how and independence here in America.
Did I get it? Very good. And you seem to know a lot about it. Have you studied it in school prior to joining this event today?
Well, here in Los Angeles, when you're in fourth grade, you learn about Texas history, and fifth grade you learn American history.
Oh, great. Well, thank you. Well, let's start with the story of the Battle of Baltimore and the bombardment of Fort McHenry. 200 years ago, this week, the British attacked Fort McHenry during the War of 1812. Although it is called the Second War of Independence, the War of 1812 was a conflict we came close to losing, and it was not supported by many Americans at that time. Francis Scott Key himself was not even sure if declaring war was the right thing to do. So why was there a War of 1812? If we already gained our independence from the British during the American Revolution, why did the United States declare war for a second time in 1812? Well, the United States had to declare war on the British for a variety of reasons. The economy, like today, was a global one, and events in Europe also affected the United States. During this time, England and France were at war. France was the dominant power on land, and Great Britain was the dominant power at sea. This period in history was called the Napoleonic era because Napoleon Bonaparte stood as the Emperor of France. And in order to defeat the French, the British needed a large navy, and that meant they needed a lot of ships and a lot of sailors. Can somebody from Eula Elementary tell me what impressment is? Have you ever heard of the word impressment? Okay, well, impressment was a practice that was done by the British Navy back in the 1800s, where the British were seizing American sailors and forcing them to serve in the Royal Navy. This was called impressment, and in a way, no American sailor was safe because the British also forbade us from trading with the French through naval blockades. Many Americans felt that the United States had to declare war on the British to preserve national honor. Some American congressmen even wanted the United States to have more land and decided they wanted a war with the British in order to take over Canada, which at that time was still a British territory. These American congressmen believed that for the United States to be a powerful country, it had to expand all the way to the Pacific Ocean and way up into Canada. They also saw the Native Americans as a threat and believed the British were helping the Native Americans. To strike back at the British, the United States declared war in 1812, and they invaded Canada. Francis Scott Key, like many Americans, was conflicted. He opposed the British seizure of American sailors and thought that a stand should be made against impressment, but believed that the invading British colony of Canada was wrong. Key said, "I would not harm the poor, unoffending Canadians." 2 years later, in his song, The Star-Spangled Banner, Key wrote, "So conquer we must when our cause is just." So was the War of 1812 a just war? And did the United States have a good reason to go? Well, let's think about those as we move on and learn a little bit more about what it was like to live in the city of Baltimore during the War of 1812. The United States was really not prepared for war. The nation only had 16 warships, and the British had 138. Mike, can you go ahead and put the content back up? The U.S. Army was made up of new recruits, and many of the battles in Canada were American defeats. American soldiers did have some great victories, and in 1813 the Americans captured York, the capital of Upper Canada, and burned the government buildings. The British sure would remember that. The British used their navy to blockade the United States and send ships into the Chesapeake Bay to threaten cities like Baltimore, Annapolis, and the new capital at Washington, D.C. Now the Americans were going to feel the effects of war. It wasn't any longer a faraway conflict in Canada, but something that was up close and personal. From the ramparts, or what we would think of as walls, at Fort McHenry, Major George Armistead could look with his spyglass and see the white sails of the British ships as they sailed up and down the Chesapeake Bay. British soldiers and Marines raided and burned towns along the Chesapeake Bay, and everybody knew that Baltimore would be next. Baltimore was the third largest city in the United States at that time, and a very prosperous seaport. The capture of this city would hurt American morale and the economy. And the British also wanted Baltimore because it was a center of privateering. So what were privateers? Well, privateers were fast-sailing schooners that were owned by private individuals, not part of the U.S. Navy. They were armed and they could prey upon British merchant ships, and by American law, they could keep any British ship that they captured and they could sell it and make money. Privateer ships sailed from cities such as Salem, Boston, New York, and Philadelphia, but most came from Baltimore. Let's go sit on the deck of privateer ship and interview Captain. Captain Trost, are you there?
How are you?
Hi, Captain. Hey, can you give us a little bit of an explanation about the history of privateer ships and why the ships were so fast?
Absolutely. We're standing on the deck of the most authentic example of a Baltimore privateer from the War of 1812. These were the most successful privateers in the whole nation because of a design that evolved through the long, winding rivers of the Chesapeake Bay. The Chesapeake Bay has a lot of rivers that you have to maneuver up to get to the cities, and in order to get from point A to point B on the bay, the citizens of the Chesapeake developed a hull form that was extremely swift and maneuverable.
So, what were the importance of national flags on the privateer ships, and what did the captains think about having the flags on their ships?
Well, the national flag over a ship makes that ship a piece of the country that moves around the world. So if you have a flag flying over your ship, you then become a part of America. And with that flag, the privateers could legally capture the British because we were at war with them. If they didn't have the flag flying, then they were nothing but a common pirate, and they could be punished as such.
Well, thanks, Captain. Let's see if any of our students have any questions for you. How about Elizabeth Forward Middle School? Would you like to ask a question to the captain of the Pride of Baltimore?
My question is, how long did it take them to get from Britain to Chesapeake Bay? Chesapeake Bay.
Oh, that's a hard question. That's a hard question to answer because in that era there were no motors and the ships would only move when the wind blew. They could use the trade winds and the westerlies to help their passage along, but it would usually take at least a month and sometimes 6 weeks to get from England to the Chesapeake Bay.
Thank you, Captain.
You're welcome. So,
now we know how the war was going on the high seas. Let's see how the war on the land is going. So, the summer of 1814 was a critical one for the United States. The U.S. Treasury was almost bankrupt, and all the invasions into Canada proved failures. Both sides wanted to end the war, but on terms favorable to them. For the United States, it meant no guarantee that no American sailor would be forced into the British Navy. And for the British, it meant possibly the annexation of the Illinois and Indiana Territory. This was the price that the U.S. was going to have to pay for declaring war on the British and invading Canada. Peace negotiators from the United States and Great Britain were meeting in Ghent, Belgium at this time, and events that were happening in the war here in the United States would have a direct impact on those negotiations. By late summer, with the French were defeated in Europe, the British sent reinforcements to the United States to bring an end to the conflict here in the Americas. On August 24th, 1814, the British defeated an American army at Bladensburg, Maryland, and marched on to Washington, D.C. Only hours before, government officials saved the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution by hauling them away in wagons. Dolly Madison, the First Lady, fled the Capitol too. When the British entered Washington, they burned the White House, the Capitol, and other government buildings, and the glow in the sky could be seen 35 miles away in the city of Baltimore. Many Americans felt a sense of shame, and Francis Scott Key, who also ran away as the British marched on Washington, said, "2 or 3 days after our disgrace, I had neither time nor mind to do anything." In a war that was going badly, Americans needed a big win to bring back morale. And as the British Navy sailed towards Baltimore, many were pessimistic. A number of Baltimore residents packed up their belongings and fled, thinking that the defenses at Fort McHenry would not hold. So let's talk to one of those citizens from Baltimore and ask her what it was like to be in the city while the oncoming of the British Army was heading for the city. Hi.
Hello.
Then what's your name?
My name is Nora Worthington.
Hi, Nora. Can you tell us what it was like for you to be in the city of Baltimore when the British were coming to attack?
Well, it was terrifying because we don't really know whether they were going to be attacking by land or by sea or both, which of course is what they're seeming to do. Many of the citizens decided to flee. They packed up their furniture and their clothing and they put it in carts and they took it out of town to take themselves to safety.
So did you see anyone important or talk to anybody, or did they give you some advice about what you should be doing?
Well, I think everyone needs to make a decision for themselves whether to stay or to go. But my family has a son in the militia, and my son is on Hampstead Hill with the defenses there. So I would want to stay so that if something should happen to him, I'd be able to find him after the battle was over. That's what I would want to do.
Okay, well, would you like to take any questions from our students that are watching?
Certainly.
How about Chase County Elementary? Would you have any questions for Nora Worthington about what it was like in Baltimore when the British were approaching the city? No questions? Okay, well, thank you.
Thank you.
Let's move on. So, Major George Armistead knew it would only be a matter of time before the British attacked, and preparations took many forms. Recruiting more soldiers, stockpiling ammunition, and planning fortifications. Armistead also knew that he had to give his soldiers and the people of Baltimore confidence. He wanted a symbol, something that was large enough to be seen from miles away by the British as a special act of defiance. Something that could be seen by every soldier on post, and something that could be seen by the people of Baltimore. And that symbol would be a large American flag. A year before the battle, Armistead wrote, "It is my intention to have a flag so large the British would have no difficulty seeing it from a distance." And Armistead got his wish. Let's talk with Major Armistead.
Good morning.
Hi, Major. So tell us about this large flag that you had, and what did it mean to the people of the city and to your soldiers?
Well, as you said, I wanted a flag so large the British would have no difficulty seeing it from a distance. And I knew if the British could see it 8 miles away, the city of Baltimore could see it 2 miles behind the fort. And I wanted the citizens of Baltimore to see that flag flying over the ramparts or the tops of the walls of the fort every day and know that we were going to do everything we could to defend their homes and to defend this city.
So tell us a little bit about how the flag was made, and who did you get to make it?
Well, I asked Mary Young Pickersgill, a local Baltimore flag maker, to make this giant flag and a smaller one for bad weather. And she spent several weeks working with her daughter and 2 nieces and an indentured servant to stitch that flag together. Now, they didn't have sewing machines. So, needle and thread, 1 stitch at a time. they brought that flag together.
So can you tell us what an indentured servant is? Who would that have been?
An indentured servant is someone who owes a certain period of time to someone to learn a skill and to provide service. So Grace Swisher, the indentured servant, was learning how to sew and would help Mary Pickersgill in those projects.
Okay. So, how about North Idaho STEM Academy? Do you have any questions you'd like to ask Major Armistead? Either about the making of the flag or what was happening in the fort?
Stand up. How long did it take to make the flag?
It took well over 5 weeks to make the big flag.
Any other questions?
Media?
Can someone closer to the microphone ask the question? We can't hear you. Repeat it. The teacher repeat it for us.
How was it like during the battle against the British?
How does one describe what it's like to be there with the rockets' red glare and the bombs bursting in air? It was pouring down rain for 25 hours. You couldn't hear. You could barely see. There was smoke everywhere. 1 minute I'm up on the ramparts talking to Captain Evans and his men manning those guns. The next minute I'm hurrying down to the water battery and talking to Captain Berry and his 4 companies of soldiers manning those guns. For 25 hours, you're not sleeping, you're not sitting down, you don't take a moment to eat. Everything that you're doing is focused on keeping those ships at bay. It's exhausting. It's terrifying. And in fact, after the battle, I collapsed for several days and was very, very sick.
I think we have one more question from North Idaho STEM Academy. You want to ask that question? Someone had their hand up.
How long did it take to make the bad weather flag?
How long did it take to make the bad weather flag?
I think she made it at the same time. About 5 weeks to make both flags. But remember, Mary Pickersgill and her assistants did such a good job making that flag. It not only withstood the battle, but still exists at the Smithsonian in Washington, D.C.
Well, thank you, Major.
Thank you.
And he'll stick around so we can ask him more questions at the end of the program. So, the flag took over a month to make, and the garrison at Fort McHenry received the flag a year before the battle. As the British prepared to attack Baltimore, Francis Scott Key set out on a special diplomatic mission. 2 weeks before, the British had taken Dr. William Beans prisoner. Beans was a civilian, he was not a soldier, but he had been accused of having lied to a British officer. Francis Scott Key volunteered to help get this man released. Key sailed out on a small unarmed ship and met the British, and after some negotiating, the British allowed Beans to go free, but only after the bombardment of Fort McHenry had taken place. The British transferred Key and Dr. Beans to a small truce ship, and from there they could see the battle. On September 12th, 1814, the British landed 5,000 soldiers to take Baltimore by land, but the city was already prepared. For weeks, rich and poor, white and black workers were out digging entrenchments, like a huge ditch around the city. 15,000 soldiers from Maryland, Virginia, and Pennsylvania, as well as sailors and Marines from the U.S. Navy, all came to the city of Baltimore. And these people represented a cross-section of America. For example, one man that came was named Edward Burke from Baltimore. He enlisted as a sailor and was stationed in the front lines at Baltimore. Burke was described as being a black man aged 37 years, a seaman in the service of the United States. When the British Army approached the entrenchments, it stopped. The land defenses were too strong. So in order to win, the British are going to have to take Fort McHenry by sea. On September 13, 1814, 15 British ships began bombarding Fort McHenry. It started to rain, and the large flag was taken down, and the smaller flag that Mary Pickersgill had created was hoisted instead. The cannon fire could be heard for miles. Initially, they sailed within range of the fort, but the fort's cannons drove them back. At this point, the British decided a long-range bombardment, firing exploding bombs weighing 200 pounds and also firing rockets. The bombs had a range of 2 miles. A fuse in the shell would be burning as it flew through the air. When it was rooftop high, the fuse would burn down and the bombs would explode. The rockets looked like huge bottle rockets, and they left a red glow in the sky. Francis Scott Key could not see the flag, but figured out the defenders were still holding out. As Francis Scott Key wrote, the rockets' red glare and the bombs bursting in air gave proof through the night that that flag was still there. By dawn's early light, the British bombardment had ended, but Francis Scott Key did not know who had won. Did Fort McHenry surrender? Let's go see Francis Scott Key on that cruise ship and ask him, and we'll find out. Francis Scott Key, is that you?
Oh, that is me. Hello.
Well, hello. Can you tell us a little bit about your experience on the cruise ship and what happened?
Absolutely. So I came all the way out here to find Dr. Beans, I believe you mentioned him, a respected physician and my friend, and negotiated his release. But unfortunately, we were informed by the High Command of the British Naval Forces that we would be detained as prisoners on a small ship until the attack on Baltimore was over, as we had witnessed the preparations for the attack.
So, tell us a little bit about this poem that you wrote after you saw the flag at the dawn's early light.
So, this battle and this victory came at a very important time when we needed to have a resurgence of confidence. And when I saw the flag, the Star-Spangled Banner, through the clouds of the war, I was inspired to follow my instinct and write down a poem set to a very popular tune, a drinking song, if you will, Anacreon in Heaven. And I took to writing. I sketched out some ideas on a piece of paper and finished it in the boat on my way back to Baltimore after the battle. And on my first night in the hotel in Baltimore, I wrote it out as it now stands, as you may know. Originally, it was entitled In Defense of Fort McHenry, but has been renamed the Star-Spangled Banner.
Well, thank you, Mr. Key. Let's see if any of the students at North Idaho Distance Education, would you like to ask any questions of Francis Scott Key?
Please.
North Idaho Distance? Or Idaho Distance Education, I'm sorry, not North Idaho.
Lucas?
What was the poem? What was the national poem?
Say that question one more time, my friend.
National poem.
So I am a very modest writer. I enjoy writing poetry and some small prose, but really my poetry was really for my friends and family only. And the way that I was able to share this poem and song with everyone was that I showed it to my brother-in-law, Judge Nicholson, in Baltimore, and he was so pleased with it that he sent it straight to a printer and had it be printed off in such a form that it could be handed out to all the public. So it was a poem written to a song that many, many people knew, and very quickly it spread and was in many Baltimoreans' hands. That was a great question. Are there any more?
Idaho Distance Academy, do you have another question for Francis Scott Key?
Not at this time.
Okay, thank you. Well, let's move on. So the Battle of Baltimore helped end the War of 1812. Coincidentally, almost on the same day, there was another major American victory over the British on Lake Champlain. These two victories gave our peace negotiators a better position, and a treaty was drawn up on December 24th, 1814. Basically, the war ended as a tie. The United States never conquered Canada and never received any written guarantee that the British would stop impressing those American sailors. And on the other hand, the British did not get Illinois and Indiana Territory. But in reality, no American sailor was ever forced into the British Navy again. Francis Scott Key's words in the Star-Spangled Banner symbolized the feeling of unity and the pride of country that Americans felt at that time. Widely printed across the nation in newspapers, it basically was what was viral by the standards of their time. And a generation later, the American Civil War, it became the most popular national song. By 1931, an act of Congress had designated it as our official national anthem. The events that happened at Fort McHenry 200 years ago have impacted the lives of generations of Americans and us today. That song that made the American flag more famous, and in a way, the flag is a visual representation of the spirit of American people. Both the anthem and the flag served as symbols of freedom for African Americans during the Civil War, as symbols of democracy during 2 world wars, symbols of equality when they were carried by Martin Luther King Jr. and the civil rights leaders as they marched from Selma to Montgomery, Alabama. And since the United States landed on the moon on July 20th, 1969, there has been an American flag posted on the surface of the moon. In the wake of 9/11, Americans have sung the anthem and displayed the flag as symbols of unity. When we hear the anthem and see the flag, certain feelings come up. So, this is a time when we're going to let each one of the schools have someone from their class say what the national anthem or what the flag means to you. And then we'll also give each one of the schools an opportunity to ask any questions of any of our persons that we interviewed today. So let's start with Elsa England Academy. Elsa England Elementary in Round Rock. Would someone like to tell us what the national anthem or the American flag means to you? And then we'll also ask you if you have any questions.
It means like our freedom and our how we fought to get our independence from the British.
Yes, it does. Does anyone have any questions for our special guest today?
Why did
Who is your question for?
Yeah, Francis Scott Key.
No, the commander.
Yeah, sorry, the commander.
Ask your question.
Why did the flag have holes in it after the battle? Why does the flag have a hole in it?
Well, I had the flag up at the beginning of the battle. I wanted the city to see it. I wanted the British to see it. And I wanted my men in the fort to know it was flying over the ramparts when the attack began. But as the bombs and rockets started to fly overhead, the flag took some damage. And the winds from the storm picked up, and the flag became wet. That's when I decided it was time to change the flags. And so about 9 a.m., a few hours after the battle had begun, I had my men lower the big flag under fire, fold it up, put it in one of the buildings, and then raise the smaller flag in its place. So there was some damage to the big flag, but it still was there to raise the next morning. The smaller flag, unfortunately, because of the battle and the rain, did not survive the attack.
Thank you. Anyone else have a question from your class?
I think we're good.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you. Eula Elementary, would someone like to ask a question to one of our special guests today? Can you speak up into the microphone closer, please? Who is your question for?
The commander.
What's your question, son?
Why did you want the British to see the flag?
Well, the War of 1812 had not been going very well for the United States. And I knew that Baltimore might be a target and that the British would be able to see Baltimore through their spy glasses from 8 miles away. I wanted them to know that we were going to give it everything we had to defend the city of Baltimore. From the moment they could see Fort McHenry and the moment they could see Baltimore, I wanted them to know they were going to have a fight on their hands. In war, as in anything, inspiration and morale is very, very important. And I knew that big flag would send a message to the British that we were ready. And I wanted them to then think that, you know what, maybe we can't take Baltimore. The more they doubted whether or not they'd be able to take Fort McHenry and Baltimore, the more of an edge we'd have.
Well, thank you. Anyone else from Eula Elementary have a question for one of our guests?
Back up.
Another question?
Yes.
Who is your question for?
Francis Scott Key.
Okay, Francis Scott Key. Go ahead.
Was he happy when he heard that the National Anthem was going to be a song?
Could you repeat the question a little bit louder, please?
Were you happy when you heard that your poem was going to be a song?
I'm a very modest writer, and so I was a little bashful when my brother-in-law shared it with all of Baltimore and the rest of the country, but everybody seemed to enjoy it so much that I thought it was more important to share with everyone than keep to myself and to my family. So it was very exciting to go and see it sung and hear it sung all around the city.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, any more questions for Eula?
How many people died? How many Americans died during the war?
Well, I think I can answer that question in 2 parts. During the battle here at Fort McHenry, unfortunately, 4 brave American soldiers were killed during the attack, and 24 were wounded. About 24 Baltimore citizens were killed at the Battle of North Point, also defending the city. During the entire War of 1812, about 4,000 American soldiers made the ultimate sacrifice for our country.
Thank you. Okay, let's move on. Elizabeth Forward Middle School, would you like to ask any questions of our special guest today?
This is for Francis Scott Key. When the British captured you and you were about to when you got inspired to write the poem, did you think about writing the poem before that?
Could you repeat the question one more time, my friend?
When you were captured by the British and you were inspired to write the poem, did you think about writing a poem about the war before that?
Yes. I am an avid writer and have written many poems. And actually, some of my favorite images from a previous poem made it into this, into what we call the Star-Spangled Banner. So I was always writing and trying to incorporate new images into my writing.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions from Elizabeth Forward? Possibly for our Captain Trost or for our citizen Worthington?
Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Elizabeth Forward. Chase County Elementary School. Would anyone like to ask questions of any of our special guests today? Hi, who is the question for, please?
Francis K. Scott. Francis Scott Key.
Yes.
Why didn't the Star-Spangled Banner become one?
The question was, why did the Star-Spangled Banner...
Why didn't the Star-Spangled Banner become the national anthem until 1931?
Oh, that is a great question. There were many wonderful songs that were part of our culture. Yankee Doodle is a very strong national air, and the defense of Fort McHenry later on as the Star-Spangled Banner. From what I've heard, in 1931, there was a movement by a group of people who wanted to make sure that the United States had a national anthem. And for that reason, they went back to look at all those wonderful songs, and I guess for some reason they were taken by my poem and song and wanted to make sure that America did have a very special national anthem that wouldn't just be for one generation, but for all generations.
Thank you. Any more questions from Chase County Elementary School?
Francis Scott Key. Has anyone sang all 4 verses of the national anthem?
Oh, there have been people that have sung all 4 verses. Most of the time, you don't see that very often. If you do see extra verses, it's usually the first and second verse. But it is always a special event to see all 4 verses sung and shared.
Okay, any more questions from Chase County? Maybe. Yes, one more. Who is your question for, please? I'm sorry, you're going to have to speak up louder. We can't hear you.
Who was the first person to see the Star-Spangled Banner?
Who's the first person to see the Star-Spangled Banner? Oh, to sing the Star-Spangled Banner. The first time that the Star-Spangled Banner was officially sung was in early October before a play in Baltimore City. However, from the morning after the battle, when Key's song was handed out in broadsides, and Key can probably speak to this better, people were singing it in the streets of the city. We sang it on the ramparts of Fort McHenry.
It was important that the tune was a song that everybody knew, and so that's what made it that much easier for all of us to sing it together very quickly.
Thank you. Okay, moving on. Let's go to North Idaho STEM Academy. Would anybody like to ask a question of any of our special guests today?
All right. Stand up, please.
For Nora, what was it like to be like a woman during the war, like in Baltimore?
Well, as a woman in the Baltimore area during the war, it was very important to support all of the efforts that all of the citizens and the Army and the Navy were all doing to try to get the city to be defended. So many of the women, in addition to the kind of contribution that Mary Pickersgill made by making the flags, many women were businesswomen. But you also had everyday people, all kinds of everyday people, supplying the troops, food for the troops, laundry for the militiamen. All of those kinds of things mean that the city has to come together and really stand behind one idea, which is to be in defense of our homes against the British.
Thank you. Another question from North Idaho STEM?
A lot of questions.
Yeah, I see a lot of hands up there.
This is for the commander. Why does the flag have a V on it?
Well, after the battle, I took personal ownership of the flag. The garrison handed it over to me as a memento of preserving the city of Baltimore. And so several people had talked about having me sign it or actually writing the name Armistead, but I put a stop to that. But the V is it's supposed to be an A. So, but we stopped that. It's an American flag. It's not my flag.
Another question, maybe for our captain on the Pride of Baltimore. Louder, please.
The modern ships.
The captain of the Pride of Baltimore.
I was wondering how long it took to build those ships.
The question is how long it took to build these ships. This particular ship was built in 1988, so it's more modern. They used power tools. It took them about 18 months to do. But with the right number of people back in 1812, even with hand tools, they could build one in less than a year.
Good question. How about we take one more question from North Idaho STEM?
How long did it take you to write?
Who was this question for?
Francis Scott Key. How long did it take to write the poem?
How long did it take to write the poem? Well, when you were inspired by sites such as the Star-Spangled Banner and seeing that the city of Baltimore will be saved, it was an easy poem to write. It wrote itself in essence, and all I had to do was find pen and paper and write it on out. And I will say, as an avid writer, there were some other parts of previous poems that I've written that made their way into this new poem and song. And so constantly working on it, but it was something that wrote itself very quickly, and the version that I shared with Judge Nicholson was handed off only one day after the battle had finished.
Well, thank you, Francis Scott Key. Okay, our last school is Idaho Distance Academy. Are there any questions you'd like to ask our special guest today?
Ivy. This is for the captain.
Go ahead. The Captain Trost of the Baltimore?
Yeah.
Okay, go ahead.
Did any of the boats ever have engines, or were they all wind powered?
So in 1812, they didn't have any engines. They always had to rely on the wind power, or sometimes they even row the ship. A ship this big that weighs 185 tons to get it to the right place. But they were entirely dependent on the power of the wind and their own elbow grease.
Thank you. Another question from Idaho Distance? Yes, go ahead.
This is for the major. What percent of the ships were those fast boats?
What percent of the ships were the fast boats like the Pride of Baltimore? The British had a fleet of roughly 50 warships, and then they would have used the smaller fast vessels like the Pride of Baltimore, American schooners they had captured, for communication and things like that. So I'd say less than 1%. But it was difficult to count the smaller vessels. We were focused on the warships that had all the cannon.
Okay, one more question from Idaho Distance. We have one more.
When were you elected as major and why?
Well, I was not elected as major. In the Army, you are promoted. So I joined the Army when I was 18. And I slowly rose through the ranks from ensign to lieutenant to captain. And finally, in May of 1813, I was promoted to major. But the most important moment in my military career was after this battle. I was promoted to lieutenant colonel by the President of the United States himself, James Madison, for having successfully defended Baltimore. And he sent a handsome compliment with the promotion. So I'd have to say that being promoted to lieutenant colonel was the best moment.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you. Well, this will be the end of our program, and we want to thank all of the schools for joining us today. And we want to thank all of our special guests for joining us and answering your questions. And if you'd like to watch the archive of this, you'll be able to see it on the Idaho Public TV /InSessions website. And we thank you for joining us. Goodbye.
Bye.
Okay, thanks, guys.
Negative. Never mind. Shame. There you go. That's good, Mike. Mike, take care of yourself. Take your nice little sack. Get back to your any video too. If you want to reverse it.
Yeah, now that helicopter's driving.
They did a great job.
I'll serve your army any day. Any day.
It always happens that we always want one.
It's a plane. Kids love it. Oh, crap.
I didn't hold the sword, or it'll all be.
Ah, yeah. Outstanding, though, dude. You guys look great. Thanks. This is how we end. We just missed the limit flying.
Hey, Jim, can you hear me?
2 minutes. 2 minutes. Broke up.
Jim McGettigan, can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
I was just been told by a couple people here that they actually haven't seen it. So they were able to see it. I'm not sure what's going on there. We'll follow up on it though.
Can you repeat that question one more time?
Yeah, I was just talking to a couple of the people here, and they said that they were actually able to watch it live on their iPads. So it was streaming. I'm not sure why your connection was having difficulties, but we'll make sure that we find out what's going on, and we'll make sure the archive goes up.
Roger that. Appreciate it. Thank you. Good job, everyone.
Jim, you still on the bridge?
I think he dropped out.